A girl saved a stray German shepherd in the storm, not knowing the owner was a reclusive millionaire who'd fall deeply for her. Emma, don't take the shortcut tonight. I mean it, this storm's getting worse by the second. Emma held the phone tight between her shoulder and cheek as she squinted through the rain-splattered windshield. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and the wipers were struggling to keep up with the relentless sheets of rain. I don't have a choice, Liv, she replied, voice tight. My gas tank is almost empty. If I take the highway, I won't make it back home. Then pull over, call a cab, stay somewhere, anywhere. Just don't go through that old road near the forest. It floods. Emma glanced at the glowing red fuel light on her dashboard. Her car coughed once, almost in protest. I'll be fine, it's just 10 minutes. I'll call you the second I get in. Emma? But the call dropped. No signal. Great. The storm outside roared like an angry beast, and thunder cracked so loudly it felt like the sky might split apart. The narrow country road ahead was slick, framed by swaying trees that bent under the weight of the wind. Her headlights cut through the downpour, barely revealing more than a few feet ahead. And then she heard it. A sharp, desperate bark, then a low, pained whine. Emma slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded slightly before the car came to a stop. Heart pounding, she leaned forward and peered out into the darkness, her breath fogging up the glass. There it was again, another bark. Broken, weak, not far off the road. She rolled down the window just a crack. The rain slapped her face immediately, icy and unrelenting, but the sound was clearer now. Not just barking, whimpering. Something, or someone, was hurt. Hello? She called into the dark, though she wasn't sure who she expected to answer. A flash of lightning illuminated the trees, and in that brief second, she saw a dark figure, hunched in the ditch, shivering, soaked, and lying on its side. Without thinking, Emma jumped out of the car, yanking her hoodie over her head, though it did little against the downpour. She splashed through puddles, slipping slightly in the mud as she made her way toward the form. As she got closer, her heart twisted. It was a German shepherd, large, proud, but now trembling with cold and pain. Its left front leg was twisted at an odd angle, and its fur was matted with mud and blood. Yet despite its obvious agony, the dog didn't growl or bark at her. It just looked up at her with wide, soulful eyes that shone even in the darkness. "Oh my God," she whispered, crouching beside it. Hey, you're okay now, I've got you." The dog whimpered again, trying to lift its head. Emma reached out slowly, letting it sniff her soaked hand. When the shepherd didn't flinch, she slid her arms underneath its body, gritting her teeth against its weight. It was heavier than it looked. The rain pelted her harder as she struggled back to the car, cradling the wounded dog like a child. Her jeans were soaked through, her shoes squelching with each step. By the time she got the back door open and gently laid the dog on the seat, she was shivering too. She jumped into the driver's seat, teeth chattering, hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline and cold. She looked at the dog in the rearview mirror. It was curled up now, breathing shallowly, its eyes locked on hers. "I don't know who you are," she murmured, "but you're not dying out here. Not tonight." The gaslight flickered again. She pulled back onto the road, driving slower now, one eye on the shepherd behind her. Maybe it had an owner. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was dangerous. But none of that mattered in the moment. She couldn't have left it there. She wouldn't. Not when the storm was roaring, the night was so black, and the world felt like it had forgotten anything that still needed saving. Tonight, Emma didn't know that her small act of compassion, pulling over in the rain, carrying a dog into her car, would change her entire life. She didn't know that behind the storm, behind the broken bones and the frightened whimpers, lay a secret that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and second chances. All she knew was that she wasn't going to leave that dog alone. Not in the rain, not in the storm. Not ever. The storm didn't let up until morning. By the time Emma carried the injured German shepherd up 3 flights of stairs to her small studio apartment, she was soaked and exhausted. But when she laid him gently on an old quilt, watching his breathing slow, she knew she'd do it all over again. She used every towel she owned to dry him, wrapping one around his injured leg. "You're okay now," she whispered. "Just hang in there." The space was cramped and humble, second-hand furniture, a flickering stove. But to the wounded dog curled at her feet, it might as well have been a sanctuary. Emma stayed up all night beside him, watching his chest rise and fall in rhythm with the soft hum of the radiator. "Stormy," she murmured eventually, brushing his damp fur. "That's your name now, because you came to me in the storm." The next morning, the vet confirmed his front leg was fractured, but he was otherwise healthy. No collar, no chip, no tags. Emma posted photos in every lost pet forum, printed flyers, and visited local shelters. Days passed. No one called. And so, Stormy stayed. He healed slowly, moving from room to room with quiet grace. He didn't bark or whine, just observed, like he understood everything. He quickly learned her routines, waited by the door when she left for work, and somehow figured out where she kept his treats. Once she found her worn-out slippers nudged beside the couch, exactly where she needed them. There was something almost human about him. She tried to keep emotional distance. He wasn't hers, after all, but each passing day without news made it harder. Truthfully, she needed him too. Her days at the cafe were long and draining. Nights used to be lonely, just her and the hum of the fridge, but now Stormy filled the space with quiet companionship. He followed her like a shadow, rested his head on her lap during old sitcom reruns, and when she cried, he pressed close until her tears stopped. She had never felt so understood. One humid evening, after a grueling double shift, she took him for a short walk. The street was quiet, lit by flickering lamps. As they passed a closed liquor store, a man stumbled out of an alley, drunk, slurring. "Got any change, sweetheart?" he asked, stepping closer. Emma gripped Stormy's leash. "No, sorry." The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure? You look like you could spare something." Before she could speak, Stormy growled, a low, deep sound that vibrated through the air. The man froze. Stormy stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the threat. Not aggressive, just firm, protective. The man cursed under his breath and disappeared into the dark. Emma stood frozen, heart pounding. She looked down at Stormy, who was now relaxed, tail wagging gently. "You protected me," she whispered, kneeling to stroke his head. "You brave, beautiful boy." He licked her cheek, just once. That night, wrapped in a blanket with Stormy curled beside her, Emma stared at him. Not as a stray, not as a guest, but as something permanent. Someone. She hadn't planned on this, but now she couldn't imagine life without him. Not Stormy, not her storm-sent savior. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the storm, and Stormy's limp had all but faded. The vet said he was healing well, though he'd still need a little more time before he could run without strain. But today, under the soft gold of the late afternoon sun, Stormy seemed different. Restless, alert, as if something far beyond the sidewalks and fire hydrants was calling to him. Emma had just rounded the corner of Cedar and Mill Street when Stormy suddenly stopped, ears perked forward, tail stiff. "What is it, boy?" she asked, tightening her grip on the leash. And then he lunged. Not violently, but with purpose. He tugged hard, pulling Emma down a quiet side street she had never bothered to explore before. "Stormy," she called, half laughing, half struggling to keep up. "Where are you taking me?" They passed crumbling sidewalks and overgrown hedges until they came to a towering wrought-iron gate. Ornate, rusted with age, and partially open. Beyond it stood a mansion, or what remained of one. The old house was draped in ivy and shadows, its once gray columns chipped and worn, windows clouded with years of dust. It looked abandoned, like something out of a forgotten fairy tale. Stormy stopped just beyond the gate, tail low but wagging, staring at the house. Emma looked around. "Stormy, we shouldn't be here." Just then the front door creaked open. An elderly man stepped onto the porch, wearing a gray vest and slacks that looked like they belonged to another era. His white hair was combed neatly, but his hands trembled slightly on the banister. He looked like a ghost conjured by the house itself. "Who?" the man began, then stopped cold. His eyes dropped to Stormy. The dog, too, had frozen. For a moment, time itself seemed to still. The man took a shaky step forward. "Knight," he whispered, voice cracking. "Is it really you?" Emma blinked.
"Knight?"
The man was already descending the steps, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as if afraid to breathe. Stormy stepped forward tentatively, ears tilted back. Then, in a move that sent chills down Emma's spine, he sat directly in front of the man, lifting one paw, his injured one, gently into the air. The man dropped to his knees, tears spilling freely down his cheeks. "Oh, my boy," he choked out. "My brave, stubborn boy." Emma stood in stunned silence. She felt like she'd wandered into someone else's memory. It took several minutes before the man composed himself. He rose, wiping his face, and turned to Emma. I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "You must think I'm mad. Please, would you come inside?" Emma hesitated, looking at the towering house behind him. "I promise, it's safe," he added quickly. I'd like to hear how you found him." Something in his voice, fragile and deeply sincere, convinced her. She nodded. Inside, the mansion was dimly lit, but surprisingly intact. The entry hall bore traces of former grandeur, a chandelier cloaked in dust, faded portraits lining the walls, and antique furniture covered in white cloths. The air smelled of old books and something faintly floral, like dried roses. The man led her to a sunroom with tall windows and worn velvet chairs. He gestured for her to sit, then disappeared briefly and returned with 2 cups of tea. "I'm Wallace," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "I was the caretaker of this estate. Still am, I suppose." Emma nodded slowly. "I'm Emma, and that's... well, I've been calling him Stormy." Wallace smiled faintly. "He always did love the rain." There was a pause. Then Emma asked, "So, his real name is Knight?" Wallace nodded. "Yes. Knight belonged to Mr. Alexander Graves." The name struck something faintly familiar in Emma's memory. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait, I know that name." "You likely do," Wallace said softly. "Years ago, Mr. Graves was everywhere. Headlines, magazines, tech journals. He built one of the biggest private software companies in the country. Retired before he turned 40. A self-made billionaire." Emma's jaw dropped. "You mean this house?" "Yes," Wallace said. "This was his sanctuary. He vanished from the public eye 5 years ago. No one's seen him since." "Why?" Wallace looked down into his tea. "He lost his wife and daughter in a car accident. His driver lost control on the bridge during a storm. Knight was in the back seat with them. He survived. They didn't." Emma felt her breath catch. She looked down at Stormy, Knight now lying peacefully on the rug, as if he remembered it all. "Mr. Graves blamed himself," Wallace continued. "Shut everything down. He hasn't spoken to the press or anyone outside this house in years. Only me. And then, one day, Knight ran off. Alexander thought he'd never see him again." Emma blinked, heart aching. "I found him that night, during a storm, too." Wallace's eyes welled again. Maybe the storm brought him back to where he belonged." Emma looked at Knight. His gaze met hers, and in it she saw more than a dog. She saw memory, grief, loyalty, and something else, something deeper. Wallace stood, smoothing his vest. "Would you stay for a while, Mr. Graves? He should know. He deserves to see Knight again." Emma hesitated. She had no idea what kind of man Alexander Graves was now, but something told her this wasn't just about returning a lost dog. This was the beginning of something far more complicated and perhaps far more beautiful. And so she nodded. "I'll stay." The drawing room was quiet when he entered. Emma felt it before she saw him. The kind of presence that filled a space like a winter wind, silent, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Alexander Graves stepped into the room with the poise of someone used to command, yet he carried a stillness that was almost haunting. Tall, lean, dressed in a black button-up shirt and dark slacks, he looked nothing like the tech mogul Emma had once seen in old magazine covers Wallace later showed her. His hair was flecked with gray, his face more angular now, hard edges carved by loss, not time. but it was his eyes that struck her most. They were icy blue, rimmed with fatigue, but there was pain in them too. Deep, quiet pain. And when those eyes landed on Knight curled up at Emma's feet, Alexander froze, his breath caught, his jaw clenched. "Knight?" he said, barely above a whisper. The dog lifted his head slowly, then stood. Limping still but steady, he took a few slow steps toward Alexander. For a second, Emma thought he might run into his arms, but Knight stopped halfway. He looked up at his former master, then turned and looked back at Emma, almost as if waiting for something. For permission. Alexander dropped to one knee. "You came back," he murmured. "After all this time." Knight stepped closer, nuzzled Alexander's hand, but not with the frantic joy Emma had seen in other dogs reuniting with their owners. This was different. Gentle, hesitant. A fragile truce between what was and what had become. Alexander swallowed hard. "I didn't think I deserved to see you again." Emma watched, unsure whether to stay or step out, but Knight didn't move away from her either. He remained between them, his body facing Alexander, but his eyes often darting back to her. Wallace appeared silently in the doorway and gave Emma a small nod to stay seated. After several quiet moments, Alexander rose and turned toward her. "You found him?" he said. Emma nodded. "He was lying in a ditch, injured. It was pouring rain. I couldn't leave him." His voice was steady but distant. "You're the first person to walk through that gate in years. I didn't think anyone even noticed this house anymore." "Your dog did," Emma said gently. "He pulled me here." Alexander glanced at Knight, his expression unreadable. "He left on the anniversary. The third one, to be exact, of my wife and daughter." Emma's hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't speak, sensing he needed to. "I drove that night," he continued, voice low. "It was late. They were tired. I thought we could make it home faster if I took the bridge. The storm was worse than I realized. The car spun out. They were gone in seconds." His fingers trembled at his sides, but he didn't sit. Knight was in the back seat. He clawed his way out of the wreckage. He sat by the road for hours until someone found him. He never left my side after that. Until that anniversary. Then, he was gone. Emma swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "You thought he left you as punishment." Alexander's eyes flicked toward her. There was no anger there, just raw truth. "Yes." Silence settled over the room again, but this time it was thicker. Emma looked down at Knight, who had returned to her side. He rested his head on her foot, eyes half closed. "I think he just couldn't take the pain anymore," she said softly. "Maybe he needed space, just like you did." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he walked forward and knelt again beside Knight. "Thank you," he said, not to the dog, but to her. His voice cracked just slightly. "You kept him safe." Emma smiled faintly. "He did the same for me." She stood, brushing her palms on her jeans. "I should go." Knight lifted his head quickly, watching her. Alexander nodded slowly. "You've done more than enough. I'll make arrangements to—" But before he could finish, Knight rose and walked toward Emma, pressing his body gently against her leg. When she took a step back, he followed. Emma looked at Alexander, wide-eyed. I think he doesn't want to stay." Alexander stared at the dog, then at her. His expression, once cold and unreadable, shifted, flickered with something that hadn't been there before. Confusion, hurt, and a small, vulnerable seed of hope. "I haven't seen him like this in years," he said quietly. "Not since—" Emma knelt beside Knight, stroking the fur behind his ears. "Maybe he's not choosing between us. Maybe he just knows where he belongs. For now." Alexander looked down, nodding. For the first time in 5 years, someone had stepped past the gates of his grief, not to fix it, not to pity it, but to understand it. And Knight, his loyal, wounded shadow, had led her there. At first, the invitations were cautious. A note slipped under her apartment door from Wallace, a quiet request for her and Knight, Stormy as Emma still affectionately called him, to come by for a visit, then another, and another. Soon, Sunday afternoons became ritual. Emma would arrive with a small basket of muffins or banana bread. Stormy leading the way up the grand steps like he belonged there, and he did. Wallace would open the door with a soft smile, and somewhere deeper inside the house, Alexander Graves waited in the sunroom, like a man slowly relearning how to exist. Emma never asked too many questions, never pushed past what he was willing to share. She didn't try to fix him, she simply showed up, with her warmth, her stories, and a laugh that echoed through the empty halls like wind rustling through forgotten curtains. She brought life back to that old house in the quietest of ways. One week, she arrived with a tray of lemon bars and a potted plant. "For the front steps," she said, placing it beside the cracked marble. "It's called creeping thyme. Hardy little thing. Survives just about anywhere." Alexander arched a brow. "Is that a subtle metaphor, Miss Emma?" "Maybe," she smiled, dusting soil off her hands. On another visit, she noticed the ivy choking the garden paths and spent 3 hours on her knees, clearing vines and righting toppled bird baths. Wallace helped. Alexander watched from the veranda with a book in his lap he never actually read. One afternoon, she found the old piano tucked into a room off the library. Its cover was warped, the keys dusty and yellowed. "I didn't know you had this," she said, running her fingers across the ivory. Alexander stood in the doorway. "It belonged to my wife." Emma didn't ask to play it. But a week later, when she returned, the room was cleaned, the piano tuned, and a single stool placed beside it. She played something soft and slow, something that sounded like healing. Bit by bit, Alexander changed. He started to write again. Emma caught glimpses of his journals on the patio table, loose pages filled with messy notes and lines of prose scribbled like confessions. He smiled more, laughed occasionally. Even Wallace remarked one day as they trimmed hedges together, "He hasn't opened those windows in years, you know." Until you. But Emma wasn't just giving light. She was receiving it, too. One golden afternoon, while Stormy dozed at their feet beneath the willow tree in the backyard, Emma told Alexander her story. "I wanted to be a veterinarian," she said, sipping tea from a chipped floral mug. "That was the dream. Always was." Alexander glanced at her, intrigued. "What happened?" "My mom passed when I was 11. Cancer. It was just the two of us. After that, everything kind of unraveled." She gave a small shrug. "I got good grades, worked hard, but when I applied for scholarships, I got rejection after rejection. No connections, no legacy, no magic story that moved them. Just me, poor and persistent." "You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily." Emma laughed. "I didn't. I still don't. But dreams get expensive. Life gets heavy. So, I wait tables, pay bills, and try not to think about it too much." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You deserved more." She shrugged again, but her eyes glistened. "It is what it is." But something stirred in him that evening. After Emma left and the house returned to silence, Alexander sat at his desk long into the night. He reopened accounts he hadn't touched in years. He searched alumni foundations, school boards, scholarship funds. He wrote emails, made quiet calls. And then he created something, under a pseudonym, anonymous and discreet. A new scholarship, the Knight Legacy Grant, for students with no family, no connections, just hope and grit. He included one name in the nomination list himself, Emma Hayes. He never told her. Days passed, then weeks. Emma kept coming. She brought blueberry scones, read aloud from a novel they both loved, planted roses along the front gate. Stormy ran freely through the yard, limping less and less, barking joyfully at birds and butterflies. And Alexander, who had once buried his heart behind iron gates and silence, found himself watching her more and more, not just with curiosity, but with something deeper, a reverence, a quiet ache. One morning, Wallace found him standing on the balcony, his hands in his pockets, watching Emma through the garden window as she sang softly to herself while watering a row of herbs. "She's brought the light back," Wallace said gently. Alexander nodded. "I didn't think I'd ever see it again." "She sees you too," Wallace added. "Not the billionaire, not the recluse, just you." Alexander didn't respond, but something in his eyes softened, something beginning. The rain came suddenly that day, thick, cold, and angry, like the storm from weeks ago had found its way back. Emma was in the library, placing a newly framed photo of Stormy on the side table, when she heard the low murmur of voices coming from down the hall. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, she had simply followed the sound. Alexander's voice, steady but serious, and then another, deeper voice, calm and professional. "The transfer should go through by the end of the month," the man said. "The trust will remain anonymous unless you decide otherwise." "No," Alexander replied. "She can't know. Not now. Not yet." Emma stopped at the edge of the doorway. Her stomach knotted. "And you're certain she'll qualify?" the lawyer asked. "She will. She's brilliant, determined. She just needs someone to believe in her, even if that someone is her silent benefactor." There was a pause. Then Alexander answered almost too quietly to hear. "She brought my dog home. She brought me back to life. This is the least I can do." Emma stepped back, her heart racing. Her chest felt tight, too tight. She didn't wait for more. In a blur of motion, she walked down the hall, grabbed her coat from the hook by the door, and slammed it shut behind her. Stormy barked from the kitchen, startled. Emma didn't stop. The rain hit her like a wall the moment she stepped outside, but she didn't care. She walked faster, then broke into a run, the tears in her eyes indistinguishable from the water streaming down her face. She felt foolish, used. So that's what this was? The muffins, the music, the garden, the laughter. Was it all just a way for him to feel better about himself, to ease his guilt? Was she just another name on a checkbook? Behind her, the front door flew open. "Emma," Wallace called out, voice muffled by the rain, but she didn't turn around. Stormy bolted through the door seconds later, leash dragging behind him, barking furiously. "Emma!" Wallace shouted again. "Please wait!" But she was already halfway down the road. Stormy caught up, bounding beside her, whining as he tried to nudge her leg, begging her to stop. "Go back," she sobbed. "Just go back." She reached the corner, the street beyond slick with water, her vision blurred. Her foot hit the edge of the curb. She didn't see the car, but Stormy did. With a burst of motion, he lunged in front of her, his body colliding with hers just enough to push her backward. The impact was sudden, jarring. The car screeched, swerved, and clipped Stormy's side. Emma screamed. Everything slowed. She stumbled back, hit the wet pavement, and then nothing. The world spun once, and then went black. The first thing she saw was the pale blue curtain swaying gently from the air vent above. Then the soft beep, beep, beep of the monitor beside her. Then, "Emma?" She turned her head slowly, wincing as pain bloomed across her temple. The voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but unmistakably his. "Alexander." He sat in the chair beside her bed, hands clasped tightly between his knees, shoulders hunched forward like the weight of the world was pressing him down. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Alexander?" Her voice cracked. He stood immediately, the chair scraping quietly against the floor. "You're awake," he breathed, his eyes searching her face, as if making sure she was truly there. "Thank God." She blinked at him, confused at first. "Where? What happened?" "There was an accident," he said gently. "You passed out on the street, you hit your head. Mild concussion, but you're okay." Her eyes widened. "Stormy! Knight, where is he?" Alexander smiled through a fresh sheen of tears. "Alive. Banged up, brave as ever. The vet says he'll be fine, though his leg is in a cast. Wallace is with him now." Emma let out a shaky breath and sank back into the pillows. Relief swept over her like a tide. Then silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alexander stepped closer, voice trembling. "Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." She turned her head, eyes meeting his. He exhaled. "I didn't start the scholarship to buy your loyalty or your affection. I did it because you deserve the future you dreamed of. You would have earned it with or without me. I just wanted to help remove the weight." Emma's eyes shimmered. I spent years trying to pay penance for the past. I thought if I buried myself in silence, I'd finally feel less guilty." He paused, his voice softening. "But you brought light into a place I thought would never shine again." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "I don't just want to help you go back to school," he said. "I want you to stay. I want you to be part of whatever life I have left. You and Night. I want to hear your laughter in the halls. I want to see your garden bloom every spring. I want to hear the piano, and I want you to know it's not because I feel indebted to you." He stepped closer, placing his hand gently over hers. "It's because I've fallen in love with you, Emma." Her breath caught. She stared at him, eyes wide, lips parted. Alexander chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I know I'm older. I know my life is a maze of grief and ghosts. But I also know this house hasn't felt like a home in 5 years. Not until you stepped into it." Emma blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought you were trying to control everything. I didn't understand. She swallowed, her voice breaking. "I've never had anyone believe in me like that. I didn't know how to handle it." Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to apologize. Just stay." Emma laughed softly through her tears. "You sure about that? You'll be stuck with a half-broke college student, a dog with a limp, and a herb garden that refuses to stay alive." Alexander smiled, the corners of his mouth creasing with something soft and real. "That sounds like everything I've ever needed." She reached for him, pulling his hand to her chest. "I want to stay too," she whispered. And in that quiet hospital room, beneath sterile lights and soft beeping machines, 2 broken hearts found their rhythm again. Outside, the rain had stopped, and somewhere down the hall a German shepherd with a cast on his leg barked once, softly, happily, like he already knew the ending. 3 years later, the garden behind the Graves estate had transformed. Once tangled with vines and shadows, it now bloomed with roses, lavender, sunflowers, and the soft hum of life. Birds chirped in tall oaks, the fountain sang again. And the house, once silent, now echoed with laughter, music, and the soft steps of a dog named Stormy. Emma stood beneath the willow tree, one hand gently resting on Stormy's back, the other holding her graduation cap. His fur was a little grayer, his legs still stiff from the accident, but his spirit was unshaken. She smiled. Dr. Emma Hayes, DVM, the scholarship Stormy Light Foundation, had carried her through. Only in her final year had she learned the truth. Alexander had created it, in Knight's honor, but for her. She glanced down at Stormy. "We made it, boy," she whispered. Behind her, the screen door opened with a familiar creak. Alexander stepped into the sunlight, wearing a light gray suit, his hair a touch longer, his face gentler. In his hands was a freshly printed book. "I have something for you," he said. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Another self-help bestseller?" He grinned. "Not quite." She took the book, reading the title aloud. When the Rain Brought Her Home. Inside the front cover was a dedication. "To the girl who brought my dog home and carried my heart with her when she left. For Emma, my light in the storm." Emma's eyes brimmed with tears. "You keep making me cry," she whispered, smiling through it. Alexander took her hand. "You make it easy." Just then, Wallace called from the veranda. "They're here! Everyone's ready!" Emma turned, breath catching. "You sure about this?" she teased. "You're marrying someone who talks to dogs more than people." He squeezed her hand. "And you're marrying someone who used to think silence could bury grief. We'll figure it out." She laughed, and the music began. The ceremony was small, friends, a few professors, neighbors, and Wallace, standing proudly at the back, handkerchief in hand. Petals lined the garden path beneath a soft white arch, but the moment everyone waited for came when Stormy trotted down the aisle, wearing a tiny bow tie, a ribbon around his neck holding 2 gold rings. Guests chuckled softly as he stopped loyally at Alexander's side. Then Emma appeared, in a flowing lace dress, glowing with strength and joy born not from ease, but from survival. When she reached him, Alexander whispered, "You take my breath away." She smiled. "Good. You'll need it for the vows." Their voices trembled, their promises rooted in shared pain, love, and healing. When the rings were exchanged, Stormy gave a proud bark, sealing the moment with joy. After the ceremony, guests wandered the blooming garden, sipping lemonade. Music played beneath the old oak. Wallace sat on the veranda, eyes misty. Stormy approached and rested his head gently on Wallace's knee. The old man smiled down at him, then looked toward Alexander and Emma dancing beneath the willow, her laughter ringing like wind chimes. "You brought him back to life, didn't you, boy?" Wallace whispered. Stormy wagged his tail in response. "He's really living again." In the house once haunted by silence, laughter now lived. In the garden once withered by grief, love had rooted deep, and in the heart of a man once lost, a girl and a dog had planted something everlasting: hope. Sometimes the storms in our lives don't come to destroy us. They come to clear the path for something beautiful. Emma thought she was just saving a stray dog that night, but in truth, Stormy saved them all, bridging the hearts of two lonely souls who had almost forgotten what it meant to feel alive. Because sometimes, love finds its way back through the most unexpected roads. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you tales that heal, inspire, and remind us of the quiet magic that still exists in the world. We'll see you in the next story.